please. And I will be sharing the slides afterwards if you need to look back on anything, so don't worry about taking loads of notes. Questions are welcome. If you could hold questions till the end and use the raise hand thing so we can see who's asking. Otherwise, use the comment box throughout, and there'll be some tasks as well to get people involved in thinking as well. Please use the comment box for this, and Amy and I will be keeping an eye on that just to see what chats are coming through. So a little bit about me. I'm Chloe. I've been at Peel & Margenesis for about 12 years now. I've worked on all sorts of Essex County Council projects over the years, and lots of them involved case studies, and case studies have been a really important part of the narrative for getting your campaigns across. Peel & Margenesis is an Ipswich-based agency. We've been on the Essex County Council framework for a couple of years now, been working with Essex County Council for about 10 years overall. So lots of experience to share, and it's great to be speaking to you all today. Some key learning points from this session. We're going to be talking about how case studies are powerful for PR, how you can find and shape authentic case studies, how to navigate some sensitive topics and sensitive situations, particularly around vulnerable people, and integrating those case studies into your campaign for a greater reach. So what is a case study? Case studies can come in many forms. They can be business focused, medical focused, but for this session only in the context of PR, when we're talking about case studies, we mean personal, real life stories of an individual. They're used to illustrate an impact of a service or initiative by showing the lived experience of an individual. So personal, real life stories of an individual or family. And the reason a case study is so successful is because it goes beyond the statistics or policy statements by putting a human face on the issue, and it can show how council service or community project makes a tangible difference to their life in their own words. I think that's the important point, is that it's getting someone else's perspective across. So case studies can come from all sorts of different sources. They can be direct service users, friends, family of service users, business or charity partners to get a different third-party angle, or service users through third-party delivery partners. So if you're working with multiple people on a campaign, there's lots of different angles for different case studies throughout that. So why do case studies matter? They can inspire action. They can build empathy and trust by having that trusted voice, someone who's lived through the experience. They can humanize your services into a relatable experience. There's a strength in illustrating the impact of council services, and the media have a real appetite for personal narratives. It's something that we've come across quite a lot of the time. They're always asking for good quality personal case studies. Even just a quote from someone who's lived that experience, it's going to be much more newsworthy and likely to land some greater coverage if you can get good photos to go alongside it. So it's really important for getting good coverage. And multi-channel usage. So as well as in the media, you can use them on your social channels, internal news, stakeholder comms. There's lots of different opportunities to get the most out of case studies. So some examples of effective case studies for PR. So they tend to work best when you can get an authentic, true story based on an individual's genuine experience, have that emotional connection, so helping audiences to feel that empathy and to really relate to your cause. That illustrative value, so having that clear demonstration of your outcomes and benefits of a service beyond the data, beyond the headlines. Bringing that balanced narrative, so sharing the challenge through the journey into a resolution with some positive, meaningful outcomes. And that community connection, so it's quite key to find their location. We don't want to go into their address, but their nearest town at least, so we can attract that local media on a hyper-local level and endorse that local relevance and that authenticity once again. I've got an example here in an image of an Essex County Council foster care recruitment campaign that we did, and it was all around trying to encourage young parents to consider fostering, and the way that we did that was look for case studies to bring that story to life. So I spoke to this lady called Corinne. She's in her 40s, she's got 3 young children herself, and she'd wanted to foster other children into her family, and she's got a very busy household, and it was the way that she told that story about juggling parenting and her own busy schedule was very relatable and inspiring, and that's something you can't really demonstrate without sharing someone's own story in their own words. So a quick task as we get started. any ideas on what makes a case study memorable to you and any examples? So if you've seen something in the media lately that you thought was a really good case study or brought a story to life for you, if an example that you've worked on yourself, anything that you want to talk about or add it into the chat, that will be all welcome. So we'll get the ball rolling on thinking what makes a good case study. Allow a couple of minutes. Yeah, Kerry's just put in there about hearing about people who have an experience, e.g. an illness. Yeah, it's interesting to hear. Obviously talking on the medical perspective can be quite jargon heavy, but if you're talking to someone individually who's lived through something, they've got their own story to share, that can have a completely different message come through. Yeah, agree, Eleanor. Relatable content that causes emotional response. Yeah, it's all about that emotion and getting that narrative across through someone else's words. We move on to the next slide. Some more examples coming through. Yeah, Angus, credibility and real names and experiences attached. It's all really important stuff. So I've got another example here on the slide again with foster care recruitment campaign. It was something we worked on with Essex County Council over a long time, and there was a real focus on case studies for each of these campaigns and trying to think of fresh angles to recruit new foster carers into the sector. This was a really memorable campaign for me. It was around Christmas time, and Christmas is a really emotive, very busy time in the media already. The media overwhelmed with stories of goodwill and charity pleas, special memories, activities for families. So you really need something special to stand out in the media and find a unique angle for them. So we came up with this idea of Christmas memories and encouraging people in Essex to be a foster carer, and to how that can make a difference to vulnerable children, particularly at an emotive time like Christmas and beyond. So it was a really compelling topic, and it was going to raise the profile of foster care during such a difficult time when people are thinking about their family, thinking about giving, what more can they do? So luckily we had this lovely story told by a foster carer, Sheila. She'd been fostering for a long time. She loved Christmas, was very passionate about it and spoke really confidently and happily about it. It was a big thing in her house. So while we couldn't speak to the foster children, with vulnerable circumstances, we couldn't share their story in their own words of Christmas. And we illustrated their story through Sheila and her memories. We focused on 3 foster boys that she'd had Christmas with recently, and was talking about how they got their first stocking, and her husband Paul dressed up as Santa and made it really special. And also all those sort of one-off anecdotes that you wouldn't get without speaking to someone who's lived that experience. And it was really heartfelt and authentic. Lots of great quotes in there. We used a quote for the headline because that was the most emotive part of the story. And as a result, it cut through the festive noise, and we got 8 items of local media coverage just on that one story. And then that went off onto social media, into newsletters. As we're speaking to Sheila, other stories came out of the woodwork during that one conversation that we then used later on in the year. So it was a good example of pulling on the seasonal tie, finding a new unique angle and telling the story through someone else's perspective. So how do you find the right stories? As I said, it's all about looking for a unique perspective and a story from someone unexpected, a unique angle. So it could be a service user, a family, looking at your frontline teams as well. Would they have an interesting perspective to share? Highlight your partnership working. If you've got charity partners, business partners, what are the voices in your campaign that could be raised in your profile? Consider your diverse and inclusive representation. So challenge the stereotypes, give a voice to those communities. Think of your audience, who they might relate to as well. accessing suitability. So yeah, above all, the appeal for the media, they need to have a confident speaker, and they need to have someone who's willing to share their story. So if you find someone who's just not comfortable with sharing their story, if they're nervous, there's going to be an uphill struggle from the start. So it's best to find the right people, assess their suitability for being a case study right from the outset, and it'll be a easier time overall. So, oh, hang on, just before I move on to the next slide, just in Eleanor's question, how should we craft credible, authentic, and inspiring case studies when the individual is vulnerable and has to remain anonymous, including where they live? I'm going to come on to that in a few slides along, Eleanor. You've jumped ahead to the end of the slideshow, and we will talk a little bit about how to be wary of vulnerable individuals and how to navigate things like making names anonymous and how to still tell a good, strong story where you can't go into detail about someone, but still need to have that authentic factor. So yeah, we'll come on to that in a little while. So organising an interview, once you've found the right story, this is the approach we'd follow for organising that. So think of your pre-planning right from the start. What do you want to achieve? What does your ideal story look like? Whose voice do you want to be sharing? Think of the headlines that you might want to be grabbing and work sort of backwards from there. Identify the best case studies to match your campaign message. So if you've got a few different voices to choose from, think you might be best to tell that story and meet your campaign message. Sourcing permissions, very, very important that you follow official Essex County Council processes for gathering consent and make sure that consent includes written, audio and visual content. It's important to ensure you have consent from case study subjects so that consent can be shared across all of the ECC channels internally and externally. If you want to look on the intranet, then you can download the consent forms that you need and some more info on that there as well. But consent is very important to make sure that you've got all the right agreements to use that content in all the ways that you need to right from the outset. Confirm, go ahead and organise date and method of interviews. So think about the best way to capture their story. Are you seeing them in person? Is it going to be filming them in person? A phone call I find is less intrusive. People can sort of do that wherever they are without feeling the need to show their face, or an MS Teams message if they've got the appropriate technology to do that at home. It can be nice to do it face to face. We might feel a bit more personal. It's really up to the individual and you, but I would sort of lean on the individual's preference and so you make them feel comfortable in delivering their case study the way that they want to and the way that works best for them, and sort of being flexible with that. So yeah, then drafting the questions in advance and improving them internally with your teams, but also you can share them with the case study in advance too, so they can feel prepared and have some answers up their sleeve, or at least sort of get a feel for what you're wanting to ask them. You don't want to catch them on the back foot. The end point about leading questions, it might sound a bit pushy to be leading an individual with your questions, but you've got to bear in mind your overall goal. And by this point of organising the interview, you'll likely know their story already, as you would have sort of thought about how their story works in for your campaign. You really just need to speak to them to grab those authentic quotes and to illustrate the story in their words. That's the reason for the interview. So if they're not forthcoming or they might be too humble to talk about themselves, people quite often are, especially when it comes to achievements. They don't feel that they want to talk about it or feel that they've deserving of the achievement. The amount of times we found that with the fostering campaigns, foster carers are so humble, they don't want to shout about the work they do. It's a lifestyle for them, and sort of recognition and accolades they're very humble about. And the whole point of the PR is to talk about how amazing their role is. So you have to sort of ask things in a certain way to get the right answers that you want, and sort of bear in mind your campaign message overall, and sort of craft the questions and ask them in a way that's going to get the right sort of result. So when we're talking about foster care awards, we'd ask, this award really shows how valued your work is, and how does that recognition make you feel? And that sort of leads them into, oh yes, this is a positive thing I can talk about, and sort of opens them up a bit more. So how do you capture the story? So you've identified the right person, you set the interview up ready, how best to capture it. So first and foremost, ensure the individual feels comfortable to share. I always start by introducing myself, sharing a little bit about myself, seeing if we can find an affinity. You know, if we both have children or both live in an area of Essex, try and sort of level with them on a human level, maintain that genuine intrigue in their story, remove the pressure just from the outset. It's a short conversation. They only need to answer what they're comfortable with. So if you ask something and they're struggling, you don't need to keep pushing if they're not comfortable to answer, and remind them that they can review everything afterwards. So that'd be part of the approval process, agreed from the outset, that they can look at what you've written, review it, tweak it in their wording if they want to. They've got the let them have that control over the narrative as well, so don't feel like they're going to be caught saying the wrong thing, and then people just feel a bit more comfortable to share. Rephrase questions and ask them again to get a quality answer. So if someone answered something quite short or didn't quite say the right sort of thing that you was aiming for, just rephrase it and ask it again. That's totally fine. Find multiple voices and different perspectives to tell one story. So quite often we're fostering or with other clients and we would get two different perspectives, the mum and a daughter, or the shop worker and the business owner, just to show different angles of one story and to build up a story even further. So structuring the narrative goes in a similar sort of way to most storytelling. So who, what, how, and why. But in case studies, it's the who and the why that are the strongest elements to make a compelling, emotive story. I often use first-person narration throughout. So we use quote marks at the beginning and end and sort of introduce this person's story as a sort of sentence at the beginning, but then the bulk of the story would be first-person narration. If you are using quotes, make sure that they're verbatim and they don't change the speaker's meaning overall. If someone has got a long quote, you can use ellipsis to summarize it in the middle, just so you get to the key point of that. But yeah, make sure that if you are speaking to someone, you're quoting down their words in quote marks, that needs to be exactly what they've said and you're not trying to skew what they've said. Showcasing genuine emotion without sensationalism. So sensationalism is where you're using exaggerated language, grand claims. Yeah, you sort of really want to bring out that genuine emotion and illustrative examples. If that's the sort of wording they're using and that's very natural for the person who's speaking, then that's a different story. But I'd say overall, capture that genuine emotion and look a bit more into what they're trying to say and get those sort of one-off special person quotes rather than going into grand gestures. So this is a bit about how we would structure a case study. So look at the background, who they are and the context, the challenge if they faced an issue, how they faced that, the journey and action that they took to overcome that challenge, what changed about them, how and why, and then ending with an outcome and an impact, and that positive impact, key messages can be worked into that. So multimedia is so important for illustrating a case study in full, and it enables multiple uses across different channels. It's really powerful if you can tell someone's story visually, audio. It really shows the story in full. I appreciate that isn't always possible. We do find that the media are less and less likely these days to cover anything without a photo to go with it, and make sure that photo is captioned as well. It's really essential for good quality coverage, and it's something that the media will often ask for. Obviously, it's different for different uses, but yeah, media-wise, a visual is always important. Some considerations for that. Consent, as we talked about before, needs to be broached and agreed from the outset. So making sure people agree to having their photo taken, video right from the start. Location, if you are doing some filming or photography, think of a meaningful illustrative backdrop to bring their story to life. Is it going to be in their home if they're talking about their home life and family, in their workplace, at a place of meaning to them, with a nice background? Asking for case studies to submit their own photos. We do this often and it saves on time as well. If someone's got a good family photo they can share. The main thing to consider is that it's good quality, so at least 1 megabyte if they're sending from their phone. It needs to be high res, landscape orientation if you're going to use it in the media, and also that makes it a bit more usable in other sources as well. And the key thing is making sure no one else is in that photo without permission. So where we're talking about foster carers in the past, they'd sometimes sometimes include other children in their photos, and we'd have to be really careful about using those without the permission. You obviously want to make sure everyone in the photo, partners, other colleagues, etc., in a work photo, they've all got the right permissions in place, or just ask for individual photos. Video footage can be edited into long and short form content, so you can use it on your website and social media, multiple uses. And accessibility, so consider your target audience and any accessible needs they might have. And when you're using images, you can add alt text online. Often that comes up as an automated box nowadays. Facebook, you can add subtitles on videos automatically. YouTube, I think you can do the same. So there's lots of other different considerations. In the screenshot there is a video case study that we worked on with Essex Sensory Community, and the campaign was aiming to reach those who are deaf, blind, or have a sensory impairment. So all the material had to be fully accessible, and we worked with sensory community partners like RNIB to make sure we had their correct advice on how to adapt materials, what's going to work best for them, including closed captions, sign language interpretation in the corner, clear audio, high contrast colorways for their print materials. So it was very fully accessible, but that was the audience that we were targeting, and it had to work well for them. So if you think about your audience and what accessibility needs they might need, just to make sure that everything is going to be covered. And the final line at the end there, if real footage isn't possible, which sometimes it isn't, there's other ways to navigate that. So you could do an animated video, sort of tell someone's story through animation, infographics, or reenactment videos. You can use actors or use people that show people's feet, for example. There's different ways to do it without showing someone's face. They are more tricky and need a bit of creative thought, but there are ways to navigate around it if you need to. So here we come on to navigating sensitivities, which will hopefully answer Eleanor's question. It's a hurdle that we frequently come across in case studies, and it's probably something that you've faced as well. People are sometimes reluctant to share their story. Vulnerable people need appropriate protections. Sometimes it can be a difficult topic and people just aren't comfortable putting their face to it. But there are lots of ways to navigate this, and the media will be understanding if it's explained to them from the outset. So it's not a new problem, and they've always needed to tell stories, sometimes the most difficult stories, and they still need to have a face to it, or there's ways of navigating that. So informed consent, so outline the usage and discuss participation in media or broadcast up front. So if someone isn't comfortable being in the media, but they are comfortable sharing their story, make sure that that's agreed and understood at the start, so you're not lining something up that's not going to go through. Pre-approve the interview questions with the individual, as we talked about earlier. Appropriate safeguarding, so send questions on email to a carer or their family so they can review them and deliver their own feedback in their own time if that's the best way to manage it. Protecting identities, you can anonymise in lots of different ways. You can explain the reasons for confidentiality up front as part of the story. So this person has changed their name of confidential reasons. That's quite often tagged into case studies that you see in the news stories these days. Consider telling someone's story third party, as we do with the foster care. We would tell it from the foster carer's perspective about the young children, so we can't tell the young children's story directly, or explaining off-camera encounters. So an example of that is one of our clients is in the enforcement sector, which is a sector that has a lot of negative stereotypes around it. Our job is to change that narrative and to find case studies to tell this story of what an enforcement agent actually does day to day, and try and challenge that stereotype that you see in EastEnders and can't pay, will take it away. Those sorts of programs have shaped what an enforcement agent looks like, and we're trying to fight that narrative with true case studies and that genuine emotive narrative. Obviously it's a very sensitive topic, and we find that people on their doorstep don't want to be on camera, for example, or showing their face. Even the agents themselves are a little bit unsure about being part of case studies, but there's ways that we've been able to navigate it, this sensitive topic. And so what we've done is enforcement agents quite often wear body-worn camera footage, which we'll use, and then we'll blur out the faces of the people that they're speaking to. So you're just capturing the audio and sort of blurry scenes, but it's still something to illustrate the scene. We've then sort of shown enforcement agents speaking in their car before a job, going off camera and then coming back on camera and say, well, I've just done this job, and talking a little bit about it. And so they sort of build the story from one person's perspective, and you can sort of imagine what went on off camera. Or we've tried to film anonymously. So an example there of someone's shoes walking onto the doorstep, backs of heads, blurring, name changes, all of that is acceptable. And the media will certainly be used to that, especially if it's a sensitive topic. It's a common thing. And if it's explained up front, then you've given all the good reasons why they can't cover that, and they should be understanding. Make sure the case study is involved in the approval and sign-off processes, so you've ticked all the boxes there. Write with empathy and avoid stigma, use their own words. That's the best way to tell sensitive stories sometimes, is by speaking to an individual, using their own words to change that narrative. And yeah, working with the media up front to manage the risk, explain the sensitivities, and 9 times out of 10 they will be understanding, and they should appreciate that if it's a difficult subject, or case studies don't want to share themselves or be fully giving their name and location, then there's different ways to navigate it. So a little bit of a task, as this does seem to be a key thing with case studies and sensitivity. I've come up with a fictional scenario here about a young carer wanting to share their story publicly, but their parent is reluctant. If you could all have a think about what the risks might be and how you would approach consent with the parents, how would you make sure that they would feel reassured to share their story, and how could the young carer's story be told? Keeping in mind it's a sensitive subject, but the young carer wants to share their story, how might they go about that? There's multiple different answers here, but any thoughts welcome in the comment box. Yep, telling the story anonymously. Yep, parental consent in writing, if it's to go ahead, definitely need that. Yeah, oh, yeah, risks of vulnerable people identifiable in coverage, definitely. Animation, yeah, it's a good answer to tell someone's story, and with a voiceover perhaps from them. Clearly setting out how things will work in the first instance to put minds at rest. It's secure consent. Yeah. Consider and agree which media outlets would be used, and no risk of identification. Definitely. Yeah, a risk could be putting strain on a family relationship. You've really got to be careful and make sure everyone is comfortable telling the story. If there are a young carer, they still need to have that consent from their parents. Thus, with both parties, absolutely. Yeah, consider changing their name for privacy. Yes, all lots of different ways to navigate it. I put some more on the screen there. So if the person is under 18, they need definitely parental consent before it goes ahead. Only using first names we do quite often. Exact location, school, and other identifiable features must be anonymised if they're under 18. Having an initial discussion with the parent, we talked about that, yeah, and explain the purpose of the case study. I think the way it's framed is really helpful. So if it's framed as a positive thing, this is going to encourage other young carers to seek support, or it's going to encourage other foster carers to step in and help out vulnerable children. It's sort of framing the overall goal, so it's a positive story. You're not just trying to capture their story and sell it on. It's part of a wider ambition, and there's positive, something good can come from them sharing their story. It could be an empowerment for them. options for anonymizing and protecting privacy, ensuring questions and final draft is approved. Yeah, we talked about that. Emotive, positive language and briefing the media in advance. I think there's absolutely, you can go out to the media and explain, you've got this case study here, it's a sensitive topic, we need to make sure that things are anonymised, this is the information we can provide, this is the information we can't provide. Just being upfront with them, and if it's a strong story, they'd be grateful to receive it, and I think they would be well versed to accepting there's going to be some sensitivities if it's a difficult topic. So once you've got your case study and it's all approved and ready to use, now is the time to integrate into your wider campaign message. So you can add some data at the end or weave into the case study for some wider context to support the narrative. Include quotes from councillors or your campaign spokespeople to bring that focus back to Essex County Council. Align with your campaign objectives and your key messages, make sure they're weaved in there if they're not already spoken through the case study. Repurposing your content for different channels is so important to make sure you get the most out of your case study. It's such good content. You want to be able to use it in press releases, social media, on your website, in your internal newsletters, stakeholder communications, blogs, all sorts, and making the most out of that, especially if you've got video photography as well to go with it, really maximizing what you get from that. This is an example here of one of our training provider clients, and they had a big push for case studies as part of their marketing efforts. They do traineeships and apprenticeships, and the way of selling those training programs was to tell the stories of young people who had been through those training programs and achieved success as a result. So we used quotes all the time in our marketing. We got good quality photos and put them across their website, into blogs, into press releases. Sometimes we'd just use a photo and we'd use a small quote with it. Other times we'd go into their full case study. Yeah, as long as you've sort of got that collateral, you can repurpose it and use it as much as you can across your campaign, remembering your campaign key messages throughout. And yes, don't forget the call to action, very important. What do you want your audience to do or to feel after reading the case study? That's the whole point of the case study, is to drive such and such. You need to be upfront about that when you're at the beginning of putting your questions together. What do you ultimately want to achieve from this case study at the end? So finally, here's a brief checklist for best practice when preparing a case study for PR and a roundup of elements that we've discussed through this session. So pre-story planning, get ahead of what you want to achieve at the end. Think about that, even storyboarding if you're going to be doing a video, exactly how it's going to come across. Identify the strongest case studies to go ahead with, assuming you've got a batch of opportunities, think of which ones are going to suit which story. Pre-interview permissions, make sure they're all buttoned down well in advance of collecting any case study. So even if you're writing things down, make sure that things are approved in advance and agreed what you're going to be doing with the case study afterwards. Make sure you capture that emotion and maintain that authentic narrative throughout. Use their real verbatim quotes where you can. Approvals with all involved, campaign integration, so repurposing across all your different channels. And the final point on post-publication follow-up. So that is great for maintaining relationships. And it's really great that people have been feeling comfortable to share their story, and you want that case study to feel that they've had their contribution acknowledged. It takes a lot to share their story and to go into personal detail as well. So anything you can do to thank them and reassure them that you've got some coverage, you can share the links with them. Social media posts that good engagement, share that with them as well. Keep them involved post-publication, just so they are fully aware of how it's gone down and you're really grateful for them to share their story. We've whizzed through it in 40 minutes. Thanks for your time. Any questions at all, feel free to raise hands or put a comment in the comment box. Yeah, anything that I haven't covered, feel free to ask away and I'll do my best. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chloe. That was really great and insightful session. Do shout out if anyone's got questions. Oh, Robbie's put a question in the chat. Is there a guide
Yeah.
on the length for a written case study, or does it depend on the piece?
I think it depends on the piece. So typically, I would say 1 to 1.5 pages A4 is probably enough detail for a case study, though I think you probably capture as much as you can, 3 pages if you need to, and then edit it down for different uses. I think if you've got a long case study and you've got some really great detail in there, capture as much as you can and then edit it down for short snippets for social media, a longer video for YouTube, for example. Yeah, I think typically 1 to 1.5 pages of A4 for a news story or putting on a blog, but the more detail you've got, always other ways of using that. How can you reassure case studies who may feel uncertain or comfortable speaking with the media? Sometimes I find compelling spokespeople, but they don't want to put themselves out there. Yes, absolutely, Angus. That happens quite a lot as well with us. I think it's sharing examples of previous case studies and how they've shared their story. Again, going back to that positive note of what you're trying to achieve with a case study. So being upfront, like, we want to encourage more people to sign up to this, or we want to share your story and raise the profile of this really important issue. So sort of building the positive need for them to share, finding what they are comfortable with. So if they're comfortable having a phone call with you and you can write that down and attribute a first name, but they're not comfortable being on camera, there's other ways of doing it. So think what might work for them, be adaptable. Ultimately, if they're not comfortable speaking at all and don't want to share their story, then I think it's going to be a battle. You need to have someone who's confident and keen and willing from the outset, ideally, so you can make the most of that case study and share it in its full. But yeah, we do come across that quite often. I think we can also give some people some media tips as well on how to come across best on the media if they're not spoken before. But yeah, I think it goes back to outlining exactly what you're going to do with the case study from the beginning, making sure they're all in agreement about what you're going to be using it for, and finding out what they're comfortable with, what they're not, and using it from there. Any tips on how to approach getting a case study from someone on the spot when we visit a community supermarket, want to talk to customers but can't prepare in advance? I think that's a tricky one. There'll probably be more sort of vox pops, I'm guessing, of sort of grabbing opinions of people on site. Is that what you mean, Catherine? I think if you're going to go into more of an in-depth case study, you'd want to sort of take their contact and go and contact them separately afterwards as a sort of follow-up. If you are on the spot, I think those permissions still apply. You need to make sure people agree and understand fully what you're speaking to them for, what this is going to be used for. Make sure they understand if you're taking their photo, if they sign consent there and then. I think consent forms can be done on the spot, but you do need to make sure that consent is still achieved and that they understand what it's going to be used for. But yeah, I think it depends on the nature of the case study. If it's a more long-winded thing, it needs to be sort of planned out and sort of scheduled at a time when they're comfortable to share in full. But on the spot, yeah, still requires the same permissions as normal. Hopefully that answered it.
Okay. Thanks, Chloe. I don't think there's any other questions.
Okay, great.
So we'll bring it to a close. I will stop the recording before I forget. But yeah, just to